Hello and good evening to you all. I am Parth Varu, event planner for Microsoft Reactor Bangalore. Thank you all for joining us today at Reactor Bangalore. The session will run over next 60 minutes, including Q&A. The session will be recorded and will be uploaded to our Reactor YouTube channel. We will share the link of our YouTube channel in the chat section soon. Before we begin, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views. Understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout and we do encourage you all to participate. Also, please keep your mics muted during the session. I would now like to welcome Jigar, our speaker for today's session. Jigar is partner and senior solutions architect with TechScalable and has 16 plus years of experience. He has trained more than 2,500 plus IT professionals across the globe. He is also a Microsoft certified trainer. As of now, I'll hand over to Jigar to begin the session. Over to you, Jigar.
Hey, thanks, Parth. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking your time out to join this session. Uh, so this is basically follow-up sessions. Day before yesterday, on 26th April, we had one particular topic covered on DevOps. That let me share my screen so that we can talk about, and then we can go forward. Just give me a second. And meanwhile, I'll mute my video so that we can just simply have focus on the session, and then we can enable it later stage. Yeah. So basically, last week we went ahead with understanding of how the Azure DevOps works and what will be the overall learning journey we need to go through with Azure DevOps. I also discussed regarding that if in case if I'm planning to play around with my services or kind of options from the back of the system, then how that particular activity looks like, what kind of options we can follow. If in case any pipeline to be created and all, then what is the option available? So we discussed last week, we understood that how the workflow looks like, what kind of mapping we can do it, what kind of step-by-step approach we can take care of it. So those activities we discussed. Uh, Today we'll be continuing with the same particular concepts, and we'll be talking about if we are planning to play around with the services and if we need to have our particular, you can say, implementation of automation or CI/CD pipeline for our services, then what is the best way? How we can plan, or what kind of approach we can have it so that it will allow you to automate and implement your services from the back of the system. So we will be talking about those scenario. Of course, I mean, last week I talked regarding that, or last session we talked regarding the Azure board and variety of particular toolchain available on top of it. So Azure board, pipeline, Azure report, test plans, and artifacts to be cover up and all. Now, today we will be talking about the Azure function deployment. We'll be also sharing some reference link which will helpful to you in terms of deployment of your activity. So you guys must you will be receiving this particular Microsoft Learn document link, and it's a part of your particular meetup invite as well. So this is the activity which we are going to do or perform at the end of the day. And this particular section is a subsection of deploy application with Azure DevOps. So this is basically a larger, or maybe you can say overall holistic learning path where you may end up working with variety of activity, variety of particular services, and you can provision the activity. Whereas today we will be talking about the overall journey of our Azure function app to be built and deployed with the help of DevOps pipeline and all. If you guys are interested, maybe you can take a look at it, this creating pipeline section. So in this particular section, the discussion was around how the entire implementation looks like, what kind of operational activity need to follow if you are planning to create. So this was the last week or last session component, which we talked about that how you can begin with your pipeline creation, what all the steps and tasks you can take care of it. So I demoed, or at least I like went through with overall practical activity. So this is something we have seen in our last session. Now today we will be going through with function app related implementation, that if in case any deployment, if I am expecting to host it as in function app and all, then how it works. Now, traditionally, if we are talking about that, whenever we are planning to build and host any services from the cloud point of view, so what all the tool chains are available and how the approach will be, because uh, in your regular day-to-day work you may end up creating and hosting your particular environment from the variety of services what you are looking at it. So I'll explain this particular activity, and I have created one simple demo over here where I have provisioned couple of services like web app. I have provisioned services like function app, and these particular services are going to be utilized or map as a part of this particular entire application or services what we are up and running. So ultimately, from the Azure front, you will have some sort of activity given. So right now there is no application, no particular services are up and running, but when you release your particular pipeline, then you may have uh, this particular standard options to be taken care from the back of the system. So it will be a kind of approach. It will be a kind of like activity what you can plan, and Azure point of view, you will be able to automate these particular things, CI/CD pipeline, and you can build and host your services on top of that. So, in general, of course, I mean, there are multiple applications here, I can say. It's not just only web app, but you have function app as well, where we wanted to push our function app related code, and it will allow us to like build and release our particular function app on top of this particular system, so that if in case any configurations or any deployment we need to go through, then how it works and all. So there are a couple of tool chain you need to work with this particular activity. And those tool chains, maybe you can consider that whenever you are planning to work with these particular services, you may need, uh, I'll just highlight a couple of component. So you need a particular Azure subscription. You need Azure DevOps, you can say organization, right? Because end of the day, you will be pushing your particular application code deployment and everything on top of that. You also need a particular GitHub account, so that you may have your particular application code and all that particular branch related activities and all. You can manage all that particular activity on top of it. So ultimately, it will be allowing you to play around with the activity. Now, choice of your application will be yours. You can go ahead with .NET, .NET Core, Java, PHP, whatever application framework you are comfortable with it. You can pick and choose, right? So that basically completely up to you. Now, in terms of working with this entire deployment process, if I'm considering, let's say, for example, if I'm willing to build and deploy my Azure services, then how it works, what kind of options I need to go ahead so that it will be allowing me to build and deploy my services and hosting my particular Azure functions with Azure DevOps and all that. So I can have my build release pipeline and other activities to be taken care. So if you are considering, then in general, maybe you can think through this way that you may have your Azure DevOps pipeline in place, and from the implementation point of view, you are going simply, let's say, if I'm considering this in a pretty much straightforward option, then here you can say uh, you will have your Azure DevOps to be built and configured. So you may have your particular organization in place, you may have your particular setup to be configured. So there will be your Azure DevOps. Okay. And the role of Azure DevOps is where you can create your environment, where you can create your particular build release pipeline. All those activity will be part of your particular Azure DevOps. So if in case any such deployment you are expecting towards the services and all, maybe you can have that Azure DevOps as a part of it, right? So here you can say you may end up with your Azure DevOps. So you will be having your particular Azure DevOps on top of it. Now, you will connect this particular DevOps activity with your source control. So assuming that this is something going to be connected with your GitHub repo, okay? So from the back of the system, I may have my particular GitHub repo where my DevOps get configured. So after the configurations, you will be having your particular code repository, your branch to be created, all your particular YAML file or any other particular settings which you are looking at it, all those particular code related activities you're going to dump inside your particular GitHub as an account. Once you have GitHub in place, you will be going through with building your particular pipeline. So you may have your particular pipeline to be configured. So the role of this particular pipeline is to the role of this particular pipeline is to provide you certain kind of build activity, right? So at the end of the day, if you are planning to push your particular function app code or web app code and all that particular stuff, so you have a common configurations to be created. Uh, in last session, we talked regarding that you can have a particular a separate dependent YAML file also. So maybe you may create different particular YAML files to be configured on top of it. And at the end of the day, uh, that file is going to be mapped with your particular other YAML file to be also configured at the top of that. So you can call that particular file and you can configure it. So if in case any deployment you are expecting can be done with the help of that. So in general, you will be creating your Azure pipeline, right? And with the help of that particular pipeline, you will be automating your particular deployment activities on top of that. Once the build activity is done, you will be always looking for a release activity that you are expecting that particular code get deployed. Okay, so you may have your particular Azure pipeline to be created, and it will be allowing you to perform the operational activity to deploy your particular source code on top of your particular function app. Now, function app is something you may have certain kind of hosting of your particular activity. You may like automate your particular code, and you just wanted that whatever the environment you are planning to build and host on top of it. So you can simply configure your function app in place, and with the help of that particular function app, you may like have your particular activity to be get going. So ultimate goal over here is to provide you a kind of deployment. You can have a simple configurations to be done, and at the end of the day, your function app is allowing you to build and deploy your overall activity. Now, this is pretty much straightforward operational activity. But if I'm considering that detail outline or detail pipeline which I'm planning to create and all, then what all the activities I'm going to follow, what all the components I need so that I will have better solution to be built up and I can have some particular deployment process to be taken care. So usually you will be able to plan I mean, let's assume that being a developer, you may end up working with your particular application code and all. So you will be like having your code part in place, and we never directly go to deploy. Being a developer, you will never go to the deploy your application straightforward into your production environment and all that, right? So you may need your particular development process to be done. So for example, being a developer, you are going to push your particular application code. Right, so this code could be for your particular build release point of view, or maybe as an individual you are working, or as a team player you are working. So probably Azure DevOps will allow you to merge your particular activity, and you can have some better solution to host your particular services on top of that. So ultimately you need to plan that what will be your approach to build and host your particular services. So accordingly you can build your overall activity. So usually you will be pushing your particular application code, right? So whenever you push your particular code, definitely you have your particular repos to be created. So maybe you can assume that you may have your particular Git repo or Azure repo, anything you can plan it out. Let's assume that currently I'm using Azure repos. So you may have your particular branches to be created, and with the help of that particular branches, you will be pushing your particular application code, so that if in case any deployment or any other particular activity which you are expecting, then you may have a simple deployment of those particular resources out of the box. So ultimate goal over here is to provide you kind of options where you can simply host your particular instance at the back of the system. And if in case any such sort of like deployment you are expecting and all, you can like simply go ahead and host your particular application code on top of that. So ultimately, from the enterprise point of view, you will be having your those kind of approach where you may end up having your particular branches in place where the group of developer works effectively, and you can have some sort of implementation of your particular services what you are expecting from the back of the system. So ultimately, it will allow you to provision and configure the deployment of your services with the Azure repo, or either you can have your choice of particular repos to be also available in place. So you will be deploying your particular application code. You may push your particular code into the repos. Once you push it, basically from the steps point of view, you will be going ahead with some build release kind of activity. Probably you will be defining that whatever the jobs you have defined to build your environment, right? So you will be running those particular jobs, and the particular jobs may get configured in an effective way, and it will be like hosting your particular activity the way it is expected, right? So you may write all these particular jobs related activity in your YAML file. Correct. So Azure DevOps offering both the kind of options. Either you push your task into a YAML file, and that is one way. And second option is maybe you can create your particular, you have a user interface where you can add your steps and you can integrate your particular build related activities or processes from the back of the system. So here, what I did in my environment, so I have created these particular resources already in place, and there is a Azure pipeline got created, and inside this particular pipeline there are some particular tasks associated over here. Now this is something up to you, like what kind of task you are expecting. Correct. So in this case right now it is expected that we wanted to install the npm, and there are some particular configurations which is required to set up the npm. So those particular configurations are part of it. Either you put this particular task from the user interface, right? So wherever you have this particular options available where you can push your particular task from the here, or else you write this particular task manually also with the help of this particular your code part and all, right? So as a part of my repo. So of course, whenever you are initially connecting to this particular GitHub account and all, it is expected that you should set up your particular environment. And most important factor, whenever you are planning to connect your Azure DevOps account and your Azure subscriptions together, then you have to make sure that you log in with the same credential, because sometimes what happens that the permission metrics related issues you might gonna face, or role-based access control issues you might gonna face, because end of the day, this particular YAML file is going to, maybe you can say in a layman language, I can say this YAML file may take some liberty to dump your particular application code or maybe your configurations onto the Azure services. And to do so, being a user, you should have a proper RBAC in place. So RBAC is like a kind of role-based access control, which is something available with your along with Azure Active Directory. You can configure and you can provide access control towards the services what you're up and running. So ultimately, you just need to plan, or you need to provide that particular configuration so that your services are going to perform that particular operational activity on top of that. So here, there are some particular standard configurations are part of my YAML file. So basically, you will see that some variable declarations are there, some particular default application building related instructions are there, part of it like which .NET version, which OS and other stuff needs to be taken care, what is the game name, where it is going to be deployed, so root folders and all that. So all that settings and configurations are part of it, where it will be hosting my .NET driven framework. It will be configuring my npm, and then it will be setting up my particular some particular files and folder structure. So if you see over here some gulp or scss and all that particular assets being used, so this is basically for minification, your JS and CSS files which you wanted to minify and then you want to deploy it into your environment. So for such kind of activity, things are part of it. So ultimate goal over here is that when we are building our particular activity, so there are some steps are given that, okay, what task you wanted to execute. So that task based activity you will be defining, and based on that particular task, you will be provisioning or configuring your particular activity. Now, in this particular entire deployment environment, we wanted to target a particular environment to be released or deployed on a specific runtime environment, right? So whenever you have a build activity, you may require a specific release to be taken care, right? So that release is something you can consider that it's your particular application code or the final binary which you are planning to deploy on a specific environment. So environment could be anything. Maybe I can say from the enterprise point of view, we may end up configuring multiple type of environments probably, right? So it depends like what kind of business use case you wanted to take care of it. Accordingly, you can plan your variety of environments to be cover up. So let's assume that I'm planning to go ahead with my simple testing environment, right? So I'll be planning that, okay, by default, it will be like test environment, I'll be getting it. And my entire solution is going to be build and deploy with my particular test environment, right? So your application is going to be hosted along with it. uh, you may consider that, okay, once the test environment is in place, the next one is probably you are expecting that particular services to be like you need certain kind of acceptance, right? So for example, somebody has to be there who can validate that, and probably it can be moved from test to prod or stage or whatever, like stage to prod, and all that particular things will be part of it. So you need a particular acceptance criteria in between who can validate and basically give a approval that all good, and we are just good to go ahead and proceed further. So you need certain kind of acceptance criteria to be taken care at the end of the day, and it will basically allow you to perform all the activities you may have it something from the deployment point of view. And last but not least, you can consider that you will have kind of a runtime environment, which is something your uh, production grade up and running component, which will allow you to basically have your services to be up and running from the back of the system what you are looking at it. So ultimate goal over here is to provide you a kind of you can say effective solution, a kind of effective deployment kind of activity, and you may end up hosting your particular services on top of the overall implementation what you are looking at it. So you may have your particular prod component in place, and like you will be deploying your particular activity on top of this. So uh, from the back of the system, whenever you are planning your overall hosting activity, you will be following certain steps and process to go ahead with this overall activity. So here what I did, I have created a particular environments. Okay, so basically, let's assume that instead of giving name like dev, stage, prod, and all, I give a name like as an spike. So you can add your particular deployment resources that what you are planning to do. Now, in general, whenever you are creating your particular runtime environment, that where your application or your services are going to be up and running so that you can pick and choose. Right now, we have two options available, Kubernetes and VM. So if you are planning to build and host your services on top of the AKS or top of the like virtual machine and all that stuff, then you can pick and choose that particular thing. That is one particular option. If you don't want, maybe when you are creating environment from scratch, you can simply just give a environment name and then you are good to go ahead with that. So once your environment is set, of course, I mean, when you are beginning with your particular projects and all, so there is again ready to use project template is given to you, which will allow you to provision and configure your Azure function related template. And you can kickstart your particular organization to build your activity. So something similar to this, like you can select your organization, you can provide your project name, and you may have a predefined template available. So if in case any specific template you are expecting to be integrated with your Azure DevOps project activity and all, you can do so, right? So it's a kind of like predefined options available. So if in case any choice you have from the resource provisioning point of view, you can pick up that, right? And it will be allowing you to build and host your activity on top of that. So I strongly suggest that if you guys are new to the Azure DevOps and you just wanted to get started your learning, then please take a look at it, this particular learning journey, and that will give you a lot of insight where you can create your pipeline from scratch, how to monitor, how to deploy, what kind of like services you are planning to configure. It will also cover up that, okay, if in case you are planning to go ahead with functions to be deployed or database to be managed with the pipeline, right? Because you must have seen that nowadays majority of the enterprises are coming up with the requirement where they are expecting database also to be part of your particular deployment environment and all, because end of the day every time your database schema are getting changed, and once the schema is getting changed you need to update that schema into your application code or in your environment as well. So ultimately if we are working with our those kind of structures and all, what options are available? So of course, I mean, there are different learning path and learning options are given to you. So I strongly recommend that maybe if you are completely new or you wanted to explore something specific, then I think this is a great way to get started, and you will be in a better position to like learn these particular component, and Azure will allow you to like go through with this particular learning journey. So I think this is something probably a kind of way to go where at least you can get familiar with pipeline building related activities from the back of the system what you are looking at it. Correct. So here initially you will be selecting your project name and everything. Now, the important factor is that here now Azure DevOps started supporting the forking from GitHub. So definitely you need to authorize that, okay, whatever the project code and like I wanted to deploy my particular services on top of it, then I need to fork my particular code and then it will allow me to perform this operational activity from the back of the system. So ultimately we need to perform that configurations, and from the back of the system you will be able to select that particular activity. So make sure that whenever you are planning or like having this particular configurations in place, then this is something like the initial step which you may need to follow or you need to configure from the back of the system. So it will allow you to continue deploying your particular services or maybe whatever the code base activity you can do so, right? So it will be kind of like standard approach which you can follow up with that. So ultimately ultimately it will be giving you a kind of standard approach where you just need to plan or think through that how the overall services looks like, what kind of approach you need to build and host your particular resources, and from the back of the system this is something maybe you can go through with it. So here I'll be creating my particular project, authorizing my particular GitHub account and all. And once I do, I will be able to land up on the like this page. And here you will see you have your particular board items. So these are some particular activity, and probably definitely as I mentioned this part last time as well, that you can manage your particular board activities if people are working in a team. So right now it's unassigned, but if you are going inside the task, detailed task, probably you can select who will be the part of it. So right now I'm the only one as a team member, so I'll be able to see that. But if I have more members to be like work on this particular project, then you may have people are added into your organization and then they will be able to work with that particular activity individually. So whatever the task list you have, you can associate those task list and what is the current state they can follow. I mean, maybe scrum master or person who is working in terms of agile point of view, so they are going to like take care of that particular activity, and they may have all those details to be cover up from the back of the system what you have. So ultimately it's a kind of approach where you can have your particular activity to be focused on implementation of the like automation, or maybe you can say kind of activity which you can go through from the step-by-step activity over here, right? So this is basically a standard approach to play around with the services. Now from the back of the system, here what you can consider that once you define these particular backlogs and other particular tasks and all, the next most important factor is to create your pipelines and all. So I did created my pipeline, I did created my environment, and based on that environment and setup, it is something going to helpful to me in terms of automating my particular task to be deployed with the respective location. And to do so, in my pipeline, I have my particular YAML file to be created. So if I go to my edit of YAML file, so here is basically the YAML file, which is going to be pushed into my specific location. So I do have my particular code repos available. Okay, so probably if I go to my particular code repositories and all, then I will be able to see my Azure pipeline.yaml and all that particular file structures to be available at the back of the system. So if in case any deployment or any configurations I'm expecting to be done with my source code and all that activity, I'll be able to do it. So here we have those particular application settings and configurations are in place, and we just need to simply go ahead and deploy my application code on top of that. So this is my particular main branch where my particular code repos are basically dump, and this particular YAML file is going to helpful to me in terms of automating my task. Now, as I said that you have a multiple options. If you are working with your particular YAML file, straightforward, you have a task list are given. Okay, and these task lists, like it's a laundry list. I mean, there are so many services, features, and components are part of it. So if you are planning to work with any of these particularly, I mean, of course, it will be part of your application. Then only you will be able to use it. But yeah, in general, you have like a list of components are readily available, and you can plug and play those particular list of components for the deployment of your services and all that. So ultimately, if you are expecting your services, if you are expecting your particular environment to be configured effectively, then I can say this is your default environment or approach or activity which you can take care of it, and it will allow you to perform the runtime activities what you are expecting at the end of the day, right? So you may build your particular task, you may have your particular configurations and implementation in place, and you will be able to install your particular component. So here I said like, okay, install my npm probably, and if in case any work folder or any structure you wanted to create, you can do so. If in case any specific registry you have, and from there you wanted to pull out your particular location, maybe you can do so. Or else I can say registries in my specific folder, so this could be like taken care. So if I'm planning to go ahead and install my particular activity, then I can have such kind of operational task to be taken care in my overall activity what I'm expecting. So right now I'll just say simple configuration to be taken care, so that it will be giving me some sort of operational activity to be get going for the npm install and all. So as I said, there are plenty of components are part of it, and these components which you can pick and choose for automating for your deployment. Now once you have this particular setup, definitely, I mean, in your further particular follow up with the steps, so you need to refer your solution files which may be dump into your existing project folder, and from there you are picking up your particular activity. Now here what I did, I have created couple of variables. So for example, if I go to my library, there are some particular standard variable groups are there, and maybe, I mean, I have already created that. So here is my release variable group, and inside that I have my three variables: leaderboard app name, resource group name, and web app name. So what I'm expecting is that when you are following up with your service provisioning and all, right, with your particular with your resource creation in Azure. So whenever you are going through with those particular step, you may end up creating your particular web app resource, your function resource, and you will be getting a particular endpoint. So those endpoint name I have just stored as a variable name, because if you hard code the value, then definitely if any changes comes in, then you have to keep modifying. So as a best practices, you should never hard code your value inside your YAML files or in your configurations and all. Probably you should refer it into the variable. So whenever you create pipeline, you can add your number of variables inside that, and it can be variable group, you can have it, right? So maybe I can say build related separate variable I have, release related I have separate, or maybe uh, I'm planning to configure anything else, then I may have a different particular groups to be created accordingly. So the purpose of this particular activity or best practices is to provide you a kind of well-defined approach where you can simply play around with the services, and whenever you are going ahead with this particular operational activity, then you may end up configuring such kind of operational task from the back of the system what you are looking at it. So ultimately the purpose of this variable is to provide you a kind of generic setting, or maybe you can say a kind of reusable component to play around with your services. And environment wise, you may have a different variable and set of a group of variables to be created, so that it will be giving you a standard approach to play around with the services, right? So you can add as many as variable group you wanted, and you can automate your particular deployment processes. So that is one thing I have did. Now, while deployment, you have to take care of another particular settings, is that your project settings. So whatever the pipeline you have created, whatever the configurations you have done so far, it has to be mapped with your service connection. So here in my settings, I have already done my service connection with my Azure subscription. So in this case, what is expected that, let's say, for example, if I go ahead with new service connection, so in this case, you have like different deployment options available. Say, for example, when somebody push the application code, where these particular code supposed to go after building and getting the final package of the code, where you want to push this. So if it is a Docker container images and all that particular stuff, then you wanted to push this particular to go into container registry or certain type of locations what you have. So ultimately, what we are expecting is that whenever you have overall deployment process and you wanted to connect and access those particular services, then these are your particular deployment options available. So you pick and choose one of the component, and you can start automating or deploying your services from the back of the system what you are looking at it. So ultimately, you can pick and choose one of the component for your of your choice, and then you can go ahead and start pushing your particular application code. So there are multiple services, multiple components are part of it. Now out of this, we need to select Azure Resource Manager, because that is the latest and greatest ARM template based deployment activity, right? So here again, I'm not showcasing anything as such from the ISE. Infrastructure code is not there. It is purely for the application code resource deployment will be taken care. So you will be clicking on next, and there are some particular service principal related activities which you need to take care. That is the default settings which you need to go through. And here you will be prompted for your Azure subscriptions to be selected. Okay. So the mapping we need to do in a way that where you want to dump your particular application code, where you want to configure your services, whenever you push or publish the code, how this particular YAML file configuration is going to be mapped with your deployed services up and running in Azure, right? So all that particular activities, you will be doing it in this particular setting. So I have already done that. So here I have my particular resource manager tailspin game, and in this particularly, I have the configurations where I have managed the connections with my services and resources, what is expected. So it will be a kind of Azure subscriptions, what I have it in place. And based on that particular Azure subscriptions, I do have my resource group configured inside that. So if in case any any of those particular resources, if I wanted to connect and manage, then the deployment process will be taken care from this back of the system what we have. So ultimate goal over here is to provide you this particular resource manager activity. And from the back of the system here, if you see tailspin tailspin space game, this particular component or this resource group is something bundled with my predefined services, which allows me to host my resource on top of that. So ultimate goal over here is to provide you a kind of a standard configurations where you need to map before deploying your particular application code or your function app code. You will be setting up all those things with your connection, your service settings and all that, right? So you can go back to your pipeline. Now that is something important. Now here, when I was building my particular activity, I was facing issue with my npm installation. Not sure, I mean, it is not reachable or it is like breaking in between because of some files or folder structure. So maybe I just need to fix that probably. But in general, basically when you are running your particular pipeline, whenever you are planning to execute your activity, here you can take a look at it. If in case any such particular environment you are planning to trigger and execute, it will be giving you a kind of options to play around with the job to be executed. Your build release pipeline will get created, And if in case any task needs to be performed, it will be showcase all that particular step-by-step activity in that particular sequence. So ultimate goal over here is that whatever the structure you have created, this is basically the last step where your npm, your web app, your .NET framework setup, your application code like deployment, and all those particular process will get like taken care over here. And if all good, everything like successfully executed, then you will see your application gets deployed and your function app also get deployed, so that runtime environment, you will be getting it, both the components are available or visible at the end of that particular sequence. So ultimate goal over here is to provide you a kind of effective solution, the automation with that. And at the end of the day, if in case any specific deployment process which you are expecting, then I think this is best way to go for it. So you can create your structure and you can uh, plan and build and automate your particular deployment processes. So this is basically the last action which you need to follow. Now, as I said, in your particular Microsoft Learn document, there are some instructions given that what you are supposed to follow. If you are working with the YAML file, what you need to create, how, what all the steps you need to follow, so that it will be defining your overall activity, and then you will be deploying the uh, like entire build release pipeline on top of that. So all those activity will be given as in screenshot, and some guides are given. So if in case you get stuck anywhere, probably this is basically a kind of way to go, or you can follow that and you will be able to have your pipeline to be created for function app based deployment and all. So at higher side, you will be setting up your build release pipeline. You will be setting up your particular environment variables. You will be setting up your particular environment. Also, at the same time, you will be configuring your Azure resources. Combining all of these particular component, you are going, you will be able to successfully build and deploy your resources on top of that. So it will be giving you a kind of approach to play around with the services, making sure that it will be giving you a kind of build release activity to be followed from the back of the system, what you are looking at it, right? So it's a kind of like step-by-step approach where you can plan and manage such kind of deployment activity with the help of these particular services, right? So let's wait for this particular activity to get performed. And it looks like that error continues. I mean, that npm error, I need to fix that, because when it is pulling the application code, it is basically you can say breaking my npm installation. See here, it is like it is breaking my npm installation. Maybe I need to create that nested folders, and then it will be allowing me to perform my entire job. So if you see, like, these are your job tasks from the build and release point of view. So if the build is successful, then it will follow the steps. My .NET SDK got configured, my connectivity with Azure Functions and everything like perfectly fine. The only problem I see is with the npm installation. So maybe I need to check with verbose, or maybe I need to create that npm rc nested folder structures, and then it may get fixed into that. So I just need to check that. And here, if you see, it will be performing all the task which was written or defined behind the scene, that compress your SAS file, compress your JS file, and then it will build and publish your particular artifacts into the specific environment, so that you can have a complete step-by-step approach to deploy your application, your web app, and as well as function app into the environment, so that it will be like available and up and running from the back of the system. So it will be giving you a kind of complete approach to play around with the services and managing your end-to-end activity from the Azure front, right? So this is basically a kind of approach, or maybe you can say a kind of system where you can consider that you may have some better option to play around with the services, and you can say it's way to go, where you can plan your CI/CD pipeline to be automated for your function app deployment and all, right? So yeah, I think that's high level implementation of CI/CD pipeline and automation of your particular activity. Let me see if you guys have any questions or queries. So maybe we can take a look at it. So here I see questions that what would help to choose GitHub Actions as Azure DevOps or CI/CD. Uh, so that is something. So Azure, so when you are going ahead with GitHub Action, so what will be the options available in that case, right? So GitHub Actions, probably I can say it will be a kind of task-based activity which you're gonna define inside that, and it will be allowing you to simply build and deploy or release your particular activity. But when it comes to Azure DevOps with large-scale setup and all, then CI CI/CD pipeline make more sense, and it will be giving you a kind of extensive solution from the customer point of view, where majority of the enterprises are having large scale setup and where they are looking for a lot of automation to be taken care with the variety of services. So in such case, like having your particular what do you call the Azure DevOps kind of options to be like quite affordable. And in terms of managing that particular enterprise grade activity, probably you can say it will be more effective. And majorly, I can say the differences, if I wanted to consider, maybe in Azure DevOps pipeline, when you are creating pipeline and all, you must have seen that you can view the parameters and you can add those tasks directly into the portal itself. Whereas in GitHub Actions, you may have to look into certain kind of documentation of the task which you are planning to configure or we are planning to implement and all. So that way, maybe you can take care of it. And if you guys wanted, maybe there is a comparison metrics given. It's a nice documentation as well, where you are looking for some comparison between pipeline and GitHub related activity and all. Maybe you can take a look at it, because when you are planning to implement, I'll be sharing that reference link as well. Just take a look at it. So you will see the detailed comparison between your GitHub actions and as well as the pipeline. So there are multiple like components are part of it. Like you cannot create like deployment jobs, you cannot have gates to be added, right? So gates, I hope you familiar with gates. So maybe you can say toll gates, or maybe you can say the operational gates you wanted to figure it out in your overall deployment. Then you can say that, okay, if this task is completed, if I'm getting confirmation, then only go ahead to the next step, right? So those kind of things definitely not part of your actions. Again, that service connection we talked about, right? So those adding credentials and all that particular stuff, I think they are not part of right now with the GitHub actions and all. So there are a lot of comparison metrics, and maybe variable groups also you can consider one of the component. So if in case any such sort of automation or DevOps pipeline related activities you are looking for, then this is basically, it's a kind of like standard approach, or maybe you can say a kind of like standard guideline which you can go through with it, and at the end of the day it will allow you to perform this operational activity the way it is expected, right? So there are some material given. Maybe it's a comparison matrix. Maybe if you go through with this entire link with table and all, then there are some comparison metrics given around that. Yeah, so that could be like kind of helpful component. Any other questions or queries you have?
Folks, you can even unmute and ask the questions.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyone? Any questions? Any more questions? Okay. So before we end Q&A, I'm sending you the links. I'll explain you the links as well. Yeah, so in the chat section, we have a link. The first link belongs to the Reactor LinkedIn group. The second link belongs to our today's speaker Jigar Pathak's LinkedIn profile. The third one belongs to the Reactor's upcoming events link, that is our meetup page link. The fourth one is the Reactor YouTube channel link, and the last one is today's Learn module link. So good to wrap up, Jigar?
Yeah, I mean, if no further questions, then yeah, definitely
Yeah.
we can wrap up.
Last call to ask any questions. Okay, I think we are good to go.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Jigar, for the session. And thank you all for joining us today. Please do share your feedback about today's session. Also feel free to use the Learn module link, which is shared in the chat section. It will give access to the additional resources to take your learning further. Also, please visit our Reactor meetup page for more upcoming sessions. Thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy weekend.